So our next session is the importance of research and evidence-based information in extension, outreach, and education. And our presenter is Dr. Mark Ferris. He's an associate professor and extension health specialist. And you're going to learn more than you ever wanted to know about a Q-tip today. And so with that, Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andy. You always contemplate how to talk about nerdy topics, from research to statistics to evidence-based versus research-based. So my hope is to make this as least painful as possible, and ideally motivate you to, because of this basic understanding of knowledge-based programming versus research-based versus evidence-based, to encourage where you are in the program development process and the importance of program delivery in the ways that we feel is going to have the biggest impact on the clientele who we're working with. And so with that being said, I'm really happy to be with you guys this morning. And yes, I would like to start with the Q-tip as you see on the picture. Now, I want to disclose right up front that this is me on a Q-tip. There is something about this just feeling-wise that would make me want to do it every morning. However, years ago, despite how good it feels, I flipped over the Q-tip box and saw this warning: do not insert swab into ear canal. Now, maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't know that. Usually I ask people to raise their hands and see how many are actually using Q-tips currently in their ear. And if you are, you're clearly breaking the law, and that's problematic for us. Now, what do you use Q-tips for? That was my next question. Painting, I did find this video where they used a Q-tip to comb this pet this bird. So maybe you could use it for that, but you're not supposed to stick these things into your ear canal. Now, we've known this for a long time. This study was published in 1974 and showed that the cotton tip swab, the Q-tip, was a major cause of ear injury and hearing loss, especially in younger children. This study came out and looked at the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum, and Q-tips was the most common mechanism for traumatic eardrum puncture in this emergency department, and 581 out of 949 cases, so 61% of cases. Major problem in emergency departments. This was looking at swimmers, and our study confirmed, in this case, the association of cotton bud, or the Q-tip, in the development of otitis externa, or ear infection. So we have all this evidence saying, man, Q-tips, we should not be sticking them into our ears. And we have the problem of the actual law, the Q-tip, saying this is not how you should use that. Why do I bring the Q-tips up? I want to use this as an example of what if we took upon ourselves to educate people in order to get them to use fewer Q-tips to protect their own health. And so we decided to create a program. And for our example today, I created this program, Early Stages, Quit the Tip.
The rule of thumb with Q-tips is don't put anything in your ear smaller than your elbow. Individuals typically do is put Q-tips in their ears at night, but typically what they're doing is they're pushing the wax further in. Often the wax can end up sitting against your eardrum. The eardrum needs to vibrate. If you have a load on the eardrum, it won't vibrate as effectively, and it can cause a hearing loss. Wax is a safety device that keeps our ear free from insects, and also to lubricate your canal. So it's not a bad thing to have wax. It's not like you have a dirty ear, but patients should never, or individuals should never, take wax out of the ear themselves.
What we ended up finding, and that was from an expert who dealt with Q-tips, particularly not using them, and that earwax is not necessarily a bad thing. It's protective. Yet Q-tips are used to remove that sort of earwax at risks that we've already described. And so a lot of times what we do in our education is we do exactly what that expert did. We are the expert, and so we share education, basic education, or we bring experts in. We could bring him into our program and talk to people about not using Q-tips. Now, although you didn't hear that, you were able to diagnose whether that was going to be effective for your own behavior change or not. So if you are using Q-tips, for example, did that convince you not to use Q-tips, to know that earwax is not a dirty thing, but it's actually protective? Maybe. So when we start a program, at the first level is the sense of our knowledge. What knowledge do we currently have? This isn't necessarily even based on research. This could be based on our own expertise, and then educate based on that knowledge. That's a great place to start. But in this whole idea of evidence-based program, we need to move away from knowledge-based and progress a little bit further. And we normally do that by asking questions like why and how. In other words, why do people use Q-tips? Why do people not use Q-tips? How are we going to help people transition from using Q-tips to not using Q-tips? We do the same with healthy eating, eating more fruits and vegetables, for example. Why don't people eat more fruits and vegetables? Why would they? Same thing with physical activity. We start asking these why and how questions. What that's going to do is that's going to get beyond our basic knowledge-based programming, and we're going to have to take the next step. That would be our research base. So now what we do is we start with knowledge and we start digging into what the research says. I'm going to give you this definition. You do have the handouts, so I won't hover too long, but a research-based program is one that's grounded in theory. So theory is simply trying to explain something. And so we can theorize. If you go to the doctor and you have a rash on your arm, that doctor might theorize what the diagnosis, what the cause is, and how to treat that. And then run tests to confirm that. That's largely the research process. Is these theories are put into play. Is why we theorize, for example, that low confidence is a reason people don't eat more fruits and vegetables or are more physical active. So maybe that's what we want to do. There is the science, the ideas, the guidelines for physical activity, for healthy eating. The guidelines we saw with Q-tips was not putting those in your ear. And so those have been formulated over time with research. And it hasn't necessarily directly tested, and these terms will pop up again in a minute, and so I'll skip over them for now, but hasn't been directed for efficacy or effectiveness as a program on important outcomes and or in the target populations of interest, so the people that you're working with. So just very general guidelines, very general theories, very general science and ideas at this point. The key, though, is that they have not been directly tested. Now, this is a part of who we are in extension. This is a definition I used from Everett Rogers in 1963 from the Journal of Extension. It says, since its inception, the main purpose of extension has been to change human behavior by teaching people how to apply the results of scientific research. Few key points. Change human behavior, in this example, getting people to stop using Q-tips, or helping people understand how to apply the research to eat more fruits and vegetables, to be more physically active, to do A, to do B, to do C, whatever those outcomes be. Actually, it's agreement what we're talking about with evidence-based practice as well. You have the individual experience and knowledge, so that would be yours. You also have the clientele values, where they're coming from, what's their history, what's their social cultural concerns, what are the values they have, and how is that impacting their take on this education, their response to this education. The thing I want to highlight, though, is this third arrow, which is the best external evidence. This gets it back to our ability to go find the research, read it, understand it, and improve our programs properly. So let me give you a quick example. If we go to just basic Google, and this is not uncommon, but let's say we go and we decide to look, okay, how to lose fat. It's going to give you some suggestions, and then we decide to do this search again with basic Google. I did a search a while back, and in this scenario, we almost got 18 million results in 0.4 seconds. Google likes to brag at how fast they receive their results. So you see right off the bat at the very top from healthline.com, 6 simple ways to lose belly fat based on science. BuzzFeed is next, and you start going down. As you scroll through all of these, you get to the end, and it says, in order to show you the most relevant results, we have omitted some entries very similar to the 150 already displayed. The reason I bring this up is when I did this task, for some of my graduate students, we went through all 150 of those, and not one single scientific-based governmental regulatory type website came up. Now, if you search how to lose weight, you get more of those, but because they don't use the terminology like fat that people are searching for and other websites use, it did not come up. Now, I'm not saying that these other websites aren't necessarily research-based. We just don't know that. And so that becomes problematic with us for clientele, people just out in the community searching for some of these health-related topics. And it's very clear how much controversy and confusion exists. So a lot of our education is not only fighting against and incorporating in personal, individual level, social, cultural factors, but also people's history, what they like, what they don't like, so their preferences, as well as any type of influence that they've had via education, whether it be internet or other people, doctors, et cetera, in the past. And so it can become challenging. So that's why we, again, go back to the research. So if you've never been to Google Scholar, you go to scholar.google.com. I highly recommend starting to utilize this. It is a very, very powerful search tool for research. They also look for patents, and books will show up as well. But generally speaking, the purpose of Google Scholar is to show the research that's been done on whatever your search term might be. So in this example, again, I typed in fat loss. You notice that I had recently done a search for the correlation of sweat to fat loss. And the reason I was searching for that is because I was asked by many people over the years, if I sweat during exercise, am I losing fat out of that sweat, right? And so that's not true, by the way, but I was looking for the studies, and there are studies done way back in the 60s that actually scraped sweat off men's backs and analyzed that sweat to find that it had little to no fatty acids. So no, you're not losing fat. But a lot of these products that we see are offering this solution. You wrap this around, you wear this during exercise, you're going to lose all this fat via your sweat. And that was not true. But I was able to come to that conclusion via the research. Now, when you get your results, you start seeing all of these headings here in blue. Now, these are research articles from different research journals. Let's say I really like this one, high intensity intermittent exercise. So this is the, if you've heard of HIIT training, short bouts of high intensity, then rest, high intensity and rest. And what role does that play on fat loss? Well, if I'm doing an educational program on high intensity exercise and weight loss or fat loss, then this would be an appropriate article for me. The great thing about Google is if there is a PDF of the full article, it will find it and put the notation over to the right. But it also has some other features here. If you sign into a Google account, the little star on the left allows you to save articles and organize those, and that can be very helpful. You can also get updates on articles that are relevant to you. The cited by 490, that can be helpful in all of your search functions, because if other articles, research has cited this particular article, it's probably relevant. And those related articles and the other versions may help you hone in your search. Also, I highly recommend starting, and you can see how long ago it's been, but starting with 2020 in our case and working backwards as opposed to doing any time, because you see at the top, Google Scholar found over 3 million results with the search term fat loss. So while it can be overwhelming, it is a good place to start. The problem then becomes, once I start finding research, okay, so I get a research article and I read the abstract and I kind of like it, and maybe I get the whole full article and read things. I read the introduction, I skip over all the statistics stuff, and that's fine. And then I read the discussion and the conclusion. I think for the most part, that's a good thing. You could use the abstract at first, just a little quick summary. You can look at the conclusion, start there second, and then maybe read the introduction and discussion of articles and get a little more information if you need that. But if I'm assuming you're not going to delve into research too much, a lot of times what we're doing is just recognizing common errors that occur, not necessarily in the research process, but in the interpretation of research. And so I want to teach you a few of these errors, whether you're doing this and you never knew maybe you were committing some of these errors, which that was true for me when I first learned about this. But also, in your role of reading a article published on some news channel, right? And a journalist is interpreting research who could be prone to making those same errors. And so I think there's a few ways to analyze this, but regardless, knowing the common errors is going to be helpful no matter which role that you have, and it will keep us more consistent in the way that we handle the education, the research-based education that we do. So the first one here is, one study is not proof of anything. When we look at clinical decisions, policy decisions, we should be basing that on the totality of the best evidence and not the results of individual studies. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was sent this website, particularly the top 10 diet mistakes that slow metabolism. And I was asked to speak on to number 4, your water is room temperature. So German researchers, I don't know why that's important, but German researchers found that drinking 6 cups of cold water a day, 48 ounces, can raise resting metabolism by 50 calories per day, enough to shed 5 pounds in a year. The increase may come from the work it takes to heat the body, or heat the water to the body temperature. Now, as a physiologist, I understand, right, that you're going to have to try to warm, the cold water is going to warm up naturally when it gets to the body. However, would it be enough to shed 5 pounds in a year? Is it enough to raise the metabolism, as they're saying, or the energy expenditure, the calories daily? That was our big question. So I went and found German researchers. They didn't cite the studies, but I believe this was the lab, Dr. Boschman's lab is who they were talking about. And sure enough, there was a study in 2003, and there was a study in 2007 that looked at the increase in energy expenditure in calories from rest to following drinking 48 ounces of cold water. And you see a 30% increase in caloric expenditure in calories, a 24% increase in 2007 from rest. So yeah, if we base it on these 1 or 2 studies, we may come to a conclusion that, it's potential that if you drink 48 ounces of cold water, you could increase your metabolism, your caloric expenditure every day, and you could lose weight simply by drinking cold water. But you notice all these other studies that are listed there, Brown, all the way down, Lee, Dr. Young, Falig, all the way down, you see that they found little to no increases in energy expenditure based on calories from drinking 48 ounces of cold water. I don't know if Dr. Boschman's lab has special water, if there's something about the temperature was the same, the amount was the same, if there is something about the German water, I don't know. But maybe there is something there we just don't know, and we should know. But at this point, if we're going to make our conclusions about cold water, metabolism, and weight loss, and all these questions that we get, when we look at the totality of the evidence, we come to a completely different conclusion than if we pull out 1 study or 2 studies and not look again at that totality. Also, 30% increase might sound like a lot, but it's only 0.32 calories per minute difference. Again, not enough to shed 5 pounds in a year. Review articles, as they're called, meta-analyses in the research, they can be complex and maybe a bit scary. They can be very, very helpful. And I highly recommend starting with review articles as it applies to whatever topic that you're talking about. There are some, this article in particular, that teaches you how do you read those? How do you take in, what information do you need? Particularly, this is toward physicians who don't have much time to find research. They're largely not doing research. They're in clinical practice. And so they need a quick way to find the research and read it and use these review summaries to help them make educated decisions. And so in a large way, it's exactly what I'm doing, it's exactly what you're doing. And so this is a very interesting and helpful article if you're interested. Now, number 2, correlation is not causation. You've likely heard this before. There are some correlations that are true that might not mean causation. So Tyler Vigan, I believe he started this website when he was a doctoral student, where he takes real data and he runs correlation. These are called spurious correlations because, yes, they're related, highly related, but they're not necessarily causative. So Apple iPhone sales correlates with people who died by falling down the stairs. Perhaps that is causative, but what he's looking at here is simply correlation. Better example, perhaps, marriage rates in Texas, this is a true correlation, strongly correlates with per capita consumption of margarine. Maybe there's something about marriage that causes people to eat more margarine or eat less margarine, depending on the correlation. And if you're not married, you may consider this as a part of your marriage vows, but it's a correlation. It may not mean causation. A very realistic example, non-spurious, was this article that came out years ago that was sent to me, that child obesity is caused by overprotective mothers. Now, a red flag, when you see anybody in an article say one thing causes another, that's a bit tricky. It should be a red flag. It's possible to do a research that shows causation, but it's very, very difficult. It's very expensive and at times unethical. Not to go into details, but if we were to do a study with mothers with their child in the womb, and we randomly assign them to being overprotective mothers or underprotective mothers, and then we train them how to be overprotective and train them how to be underprotective in the other group, the children were born and they were raised. We monitored them to make sure the parents were being really overprotective. And then the underprotective, they were letting their kids run with scissors or whatever it might have been, eat whatever they would want. But we controlled all of that to then see if the child became classified as obese or not. As far-fetched as that sound, that would me as a researcher, that's what I would have to do. Yet that would be unethical, and I would never get approval to do that study anyway. And so odds are what's happened here. Odds are it's not looking at causation, but it's looking at association. And so I went and found the study, and that's exactly what they found, that higher maternal protectiveness is associated with higher odds of child overweight and obesity. And they did do a longitudinal study. It was a great study, and they found an association, but it didn't mean causation. And actually, if you look at it, it was only found in a particular age range and not all children, and the correlation was not as strong as maybe that media article made it out to be. So be careful with causation versus correlation. The third one here is significance. Now, again, not to bore you with statistics, but when we look at statistics, there's two things. And I'm going to use this example of fear of big muscles, which is the number one reported barrier that I've seen of women to lifting weights. And for me, I've had a career of trying to help women lift more weights because of all the wonderful benefits of not only exercise, but particularly resistance training, whether it's their body weight or dumbbells or bands or whatever it might have been, of all ages. Very, very consistently, the barrier that comes back is I don't want to do that because I don't want to get big muscles. And they utilize images like this and pictures like this to show that, see, you can get big muscles. Now, practically speaking, you may already know that this particular individual here got big because of steroid use. So exogenous means this was not natural from just lifting weights. And the same thing with men, but it's still a big enough barrier. So if we look at research, we look at two types of significance. This was actually that in 19 women and in 20 weeks of extreme intense weight training, not something you would stumble on, very programmed, very directed at muscle growth and strength, that the common person would not do this by far. Over on the left, you see in blue the leg lean mass. In other words, they looked at the amount of muscle in all of their legs before they started the program at the pre, and then they looked at mid, so 10 weeks in, and then 20 weeks at the post. The three black bars represent the mean leg mass in kilograms at 3 time points. The little bars that come up are called standard deviation, and at the very end, that third bar at the post, you see a star or an asterisk at the very, very top. In research, what that denotes is what's called statistical significance. You may have heard of p-values and all that. Very simply put, when you see that, that means that these results are likely not due to error. In other words, this increase, as you see in that third bar in leg muscle mass from the pre, is likely due to this 20 weeks of weight training. And we're very confident in these results, that it was not due to error, that it was due to the weight training. That's all it says. Now, if you ask the question, yeah, but how much was the increase? Statistical significance does not tell us anything like that. What we actually have to do is what's called applied significance. We look at how much was the increase. In pounds, it was 1.32 pounds. In other words, 20 weeks of heavy, intense weight training in women only produced 1.3 pounds of muscle gain in all of their legs. Their pants probably did not even fit differently. So this is showing evidence, for example, that weight training is not going to produce big muscles in women, especially based on some of the perceptions perhaps that some women have. And it should not be a barrier to them lifting weights. Yet somebody could say that there was a significant increase in muscle mass, and that's true. Statistically, there was an increase. But if you look, again, from an applied standpoint, you'll hear doctors talk about clinical significance. It's the same thing as applied. Yeah, but it was only 1.32 pounds. And so you have to be careful when you read articles and they use the word, quote unquote, significant, and actually look at what they found to make your decisions from there. And with that being said, there's bias that occurs. We all exist in some level, to some degree, with bias. There can be bias in research. There can be bias in media. And so being aware of that, I think, will be helpful. Also, and this is where I want to hone in a bit, because this will affect our education, particularly from an evidence-based standpoint, is that some programs, some research, some ideas are not based in theory. Our definition of extension here, our goal, our purpose is to change human behavior. So if we develop a program like Quit the Tips, or we do an educational program, whether we developed or not, is it going to change human behavior? Is it working? This question is going to really advance our program development, how we understand programs, how we educate, how we measure things, why we evaluate to the degree that we do, to make sure that we're having the impact that we want, and not just hoping we have the impact, but actually concurring and confirming that we do. So I'll give you one or two quick examples. With Q-tips, we might be worried about the motivation to stop using Q-tips. Well, there's a theory, for example, called self-determination theory. The motivation, they would say, well, you have different types of motivation. So let's say we ask people, which I did. I asked a group of graduate students and undergraduate students, what were the main reasons that you use Q-tips? So they said, well, dry the wetness was number one. Feel my ears are dirty. And then 3, feels good, which is the category that I fall in. So that was my assessment. This is why you're using Q-tips. If I don't know why or what their motivation is, then it's going to be hard to educate around that. The theory itself says, look, you're motivated to do things for autonomy, so to be the origin of your own actions. You're motivated to do things that you feel competent in doing. Remember earlier I said that lack of confidence or competence is a main barrier to people starting exercise, physical activity, starting healthy eating. And so if somebody doesn't feel competent in doing something, then they're not going to be motivated to do that to a large degree. Then there's relatedness, which is our sort of connectedness with others. And so this theory says these 3 things, these needs that people have, you need to make sure that you're accommodating. And you notice so let's get people to stop using Q-tips, and I want to have some alternative. So you're using Q-tips because your ears are wet and you don't like that feeling. What's my alternative to them? And is that alternative, do they feel competent in doing that alternative? Do they feel that they want to do that? Are they as motivated to do that? Does it take too long? What are the barriers to that? If we just give alternatives, for example, without considering the motivation for the alternative, then this theory would say our education is not going to work. So I went and looked at alternatives to using Q-tips. And this Academy of Head and Neck Surgery, we find that they have a whole article written on alternatives. And what they say is using an organic baby oil, put a few drops in your ear if you're concerned about earwax. And over time, they didn't give a specific amount of time, depending on the person, that earwax will fall out. Now, I can't guarantee when that will fall out, apparently. So I apologize up front if it happens on a date or something like that. But that's the idea behind the organic baby oil option. And maybe, again, this is a good example. Maybe that's too big of a barrier for you to do that, and you'd rather use Q-tips, even though you might not do that. There's also other perceptions. Hydrogen peroxide. They actually warned against hydrogen peroxide because it kills all cells and can kill skin cells and make some other problems. They also promoted, if you're dealing with wet ears and you don't like that, to utilize a blow dryer or a tissue or something like that, that you get a fix from the wetness without having to stick a Q-tip in your ear. When we talk about applying this and we say, okay, Q-tips, I am intrinsically motivated. It feels good. Self-determined, yeah, I want to use Q-tips, but I don't want to do the blow dryer thing. So the alternative, I would only do it because you're making me. So it's determined by you telling me I need to do it. That's not going to last. So how do we educate in the way that we can help the alternatives become, okay, that's cool. I understand that. You've educated me on the blow dryer. You've educated me on the oil and the tissue. And I think that's going to work for me. And I want to do that. So now I am motivated to do that. If you can get people to the self-determined, they're not being forced to do it. The self-determination theory is they will likely stick with that behavior much, much longer. So did our education in our Quit the Tip program, it should be designed to then promote self-determination of the alternatives that we provide in our education. If we don't, and we didn't utilize this theoretical perspective, we could be in a situation where our education did not help people change their behavior. So how do you perceive quitting? How do you perceive the alternative? These could be simple questions we ask. This could be with physical activity. It could be giving up fast food, giving up snacks. Some people talk about how mashed cauliflower tastes exactly the same as mashed potatoes. To me, it doesn't. I don't enjoy the alternative as much. And so considering some of these questions will be very helpful from a motivational standpoint. The last one that becomes important with what we're talking about today is called the stages of change. And this is about not the motivation per se, but about the process of change. And what this theory says, and you probably have heard this before, is there are 5 stages of change, generally speaking. People are pre-contemplative. I don't want to change. I'm not even thinking about it, not even contemplating it, to the point to where, okay, now I'm thinking about it. Saw an article, or hey, this random guy in a training told me that I shouldn't be sticking Q-tips in my ear. Now I'm thinking about it. Some are preparing. Okay, when I get home, I'm throwing these things away. I'm not letting my kids do it. So you're in preparation. This is buying your shoes, buying your gym membership, going to the store and buying some healthy foods, especially with the new year. I have a lot of people in this preparation stage. And then as soon as you start acting, as soon as you start exercising, you start eating healthily, you're in action. If you stop using Q-tips, which I hope you do, but at least sticking them in your ear, then that would be, you'd be in the action stage. At some point, the switch is flipped and you're just maintaining that behavior. It's just a part of your normal life. Going for a 30-minute walk 5 days a week, that's just like maintenance. It's just what I do. Eating healthily most of my meals, man, it's just what I do. Not using Q-tips, that's who I am. It's not who I used to be, but now it's who I am now. That's maintenance stage. 6 months, 12 months, something like that into the behavior change process. Now, the stage is important because we could ask somebody, in this case, stopping Q-tips, what stage are you in? Ask yourself, what stage in, right? Based about Q-tip. That will dictate how much motivation subsequent process. Also, when you're dealing with behavior change in these stages, you could relapse. And that term means you're at a particular stage, but then you fall back to a previous stage. I'm in action, and then I fall back to contemplation because of an injury, because of vacation, because of whatever. And so my life has changed. So it's sort of like this old game, if you remember this, Chutes and Ladder. I actually played this last night with my 4-year-old daughter. This is the original board, which we don't have, but this is the whole idea behind this game, is that you're going along and you could hit a ladder and improve and move up, and you're doing well, you're doing well, you're doing well, and you're rewarded for those behaviors. But every once in a while, you could hit a chute and slide back to a previous stage. And so this is a visual representation based on the stage of change theory of how change occurs and the ups and downs that are normal to behavior change, and teaching people how to handle these both the ladders, the good times, and then handle the chutes when we slide backwards, and how to stay motivated throughout all of that. So how do we apply it? Well, this theory says, look, number one, I want you to assess the person's stage of change. So again, I've already asked you what your stage of change is. We want to be aware of treating all people as though they are in action or that they want to change. Some people don't even want to change. So if I'm educating them based on that, then it's not going to work as well as if I educate them based on someone who does not want to change, instead of assuming that they do want to change or they're in some process of changing. Number three, do the right processes at the right stages, which we'll see in a moment. And then we can learn from other interventions. So one quick example, Bess Marcus did a study. It was published in 1992 with physical activity. In short, what she did was she brought adults in to a room, and this again was physical activity. She asked them what stage they were in with increasing their physical activity. And some of the people in this group were contemplative. They were thinking about it. Some in the group were in preparation. They'd already bought their gym membership, their shoes, their matching outfit. Everything was ready to go. They were in prep. They were prepared. And then there was a third group who were in action. They've already started. They haven't gotten to maintenance yet. It's not a habit per se or routine. It's just something that they've started. So what she did, it was brilliant. On their way out, she gave each one of these people a booklet of education that was specific to the stage that they were in. So the people who were contemplative, based on her assessment, they got a book that says, what's in it for you? And then it was education specific to someone in the contemplative stage. Preparation, ready for action, specific to somebody in preparation. Keep it going. The action people about relapse prevention, teach them very specifically. There could be overlap across all three of these stages, but the person in action might be in some ways uniquely educated versus somebody in preparation and contemplation. And she saw good results within helping people improve their physical activity and maintain that behavior. So I'm thinking, okay, cool, that's a great study. Can I learn from that intervention in the program development here? And let's say I do the exact same thing with Quit the Tips. And maybe that's our format for how we not only assess, but provide our education. This also is another tactic that we could use a part of this theoretical base. In the stage of change theory, as you watch this, there is a process called dramatic relief that is being utilized here, whether you know it or not. And so I will let you watch this last little part, and then I'll come back to you.
We actually see wax completely on your eardrum. So this is clearly someone who uses Q-tips. So let's get that out for you. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is called a right angle hook. And this allows me to kind of get a little bit deeper here and just kind of hook onto the wax, grab it.
Oh my God.
Kind of get it all one swoop there. And this is why we learn surgery, so we can do these kinds of things. There it is.
Wow. Wow.
That was somebody who used Q-tips, as are these people. Utilize Q-tips enough, you can start impacting the earwax. As the expert told us at the very beginning of this, as a warning sign that probably didn't work for many of us, but now we're seeing the outcomes of that and how gross that is, and how I'm trying to do this to be clean, and I might be making things more unclean. I'm trying to do this, I thought, for safety, but now I'm making my ear more unsafe. Why might this work more effectively? If I were to ask you what stage you're in, would that change? It's a process, as I mentioned, called dramatic relief. And what that means is, theoretically speaking, if I can create drama, negative feelings, people want to read negative things as quickly as possible. So again, if I show you some of these, if that produces negative feelings with you, you may want to look away. This is like, the Humane Society commercials with the abandoned animals and the cats and dogs in the cold and in cages, and Sarah McLachlan playing in the background. That is theoretically based. We see it with anti-smoking and tobacco ads with a little more intense type visual, trying to create negative feelings so that, as the case in the Humane Society, that you give them money. Many people relieve their negative feelings by just changing the channel. And so some may want to look away from these pictures as a process of relief from that drama, relief from the negative feelings. The hope is, though, that by showing you this, that you want to relieve yourself of the negative feelings by stopping putting Q-tips in your ear. And that would be a theoretical-based approach. This is a similar approach that was used with skin cancer, especially in younger women who were doing a lot of sun tanning, and they're out in the sun or in different facilities, and the increased risk of skin cancer. Now, they were trying to get more tan, to be more attractive, to improve their skin, to improve their appearance, for example, and the health messages against warning them of skin cancer, the health messages about getting them to use more sunscreen were just not working as well as they had hoped. So then what they did, they started taking UV photographs, as in this example, of the women's skin. Now, you see a spot on this, you see a spot, I thought I had an animation, but see kind of to the, just to the left of her left eye here from our visual. And so on the left picture, that just shows up maybe as a little red spot. Maybe you think that's a pimple or something, but that's actually the start of skin cancer. And that's the start of something much, much worse. Plus, you can see through the UV all the skin damage that's occurring from the sun, particularly tanning or spending time out in the sun without proper care and sunscreen, for example. So what they started doing is they started combining these sort of visuals, which would create negative feelings, with the health message to help relieve those negative feelings by starting to use sunscreen. And it was much more effective than just the health message alone. Hey, you're at risk for skin cancer, doing what you're doing, quit doing it, use more sunscreen. It was based on theory, thus more effective. So when we develop education research-based, we tap in to that. Now we're finally at the last point and last question here. That's, if our goal is to change human behavior, we ask the question, will it? And that allows us to really evaluate the content of our programming. But now, did it? Did the program that we delivered, when we deliver Quit the Tips, for example, what percentage of people quit using the Q-tips? And why and how long? And so then we can start evaluating and finally get to the last level of our knowledge-based, research-based, and now evidence-based. By definition, a program, in this case, Quit the Tips, has been rigorously tested with research without bias for both efficacy and effectiveness. Efficacy means that the program is tested under ideal conditions. So if we want to do test an efficacy of Quit the Tip program, I would probably team up with some researchers, and we would go through a process of either bringing people to the lab, maybe to a lab or a community setting. We'd pick one community. We would figure out a very rigorous methodology. The people who were teaching, if we were using some Master Wellness volunteers to teach this class, we would make sure that they were very aware of the research process, that they were all teaching it the same, that they were offering the classes at the same time with the same type of people. We would only select or recruit a certain population and control for as many things that we could to have as ideal of a condition that we could set up, just to determine if Quit the Tips works. And so if I do a study, for example, looking at a new exercise routine on weight loss, if I don't control for what the people are eating, then that could be problematic. And so I want to make sure that we are doing it under ideal conditions if possible. And lastly here is the effectiveness. The program is under conditions with different people, with different count, different instructors, but again, with a rigorous methodology. And in this case, we're now at a point where we can apply the results of the scientific research in our programming. And Andy, I'd like to kind of end with this last portion because I have to give Andy credit on this, but this idea that we are not just dealing with delivering programs, but trying to deliver the programs as closely as we can to what the program is intended to be delivered. And so what Andy has used in the past, you may have seen this, And so if a program analogy, and Andy, you should probably give this, so don't judge me if I ruin this, but if we have this program and it's a duck in this case, and we make changes, and let's say we could potentially improve. And what I want to encourage you, if I could real quick, is I know delivering programs, sometimes you think maybe we need to deliver it this way, or you're finding problems with it, or you think of a better way. But it's going to potentially improve the program. Then you can communicate with that, and that could be a modification that enhances. It could make things worse too, and that's why we need to discuss those things. The risk is, and this is fidelity, you're delivering, you make a few changes, no big deal. It actually might make it better. However, if you make so many changes, now you've modified it to the point where you've created something totally different. That's where we get a problem with fidelity, and that's where we get a problem across a larger scale when we're delivering programs, for example, across an entire state and evaluating the effects of that program. But now we have people delivering it in all different ways, and we're not getting the results that we had hoped. And that's the idea of fidelity. And I hope that it's going to be encouragement to you, not only when you develop programs, if you're in that role, or you're just delivering programs, and or you're engaging in topics related to your interest in media and from the news and doctors, et cetera, that this topic of knowledge-based, research-based, and evidence-based gives you a better foundation, at least a platform to think about things a little more differently and in line with the way that we're trying to move forward. And so, Andy, do you have questions, or anybody else might want to throw out any questions to me, if they're still awake?
I'm not seeing anything, Mark, but I appreciate the time you took today. And you see Dr. Ferris' email on the screen there, and you can also get in touch with him via your county extension office, or look for his upcoming series on TLC about ear, nose, and throat horror stories to match the lineup of Dr. Pimple Popper and My Feet Are Killing Me.
I wish.
But we appreciate your time here today, Mark, and look forward to working more closely with you, with the Master Wellness Volunteers, to make sure that they're carrying forward our mission of research and evidence-based education in communities.